And oh, right, I got it. I'll click that. If you hover over the button on the website what Beth wanted me to put in, it'll give you a link to our fall 2021 series, Stories of Co-Creation. So that's my job, tell some stories. Duh. So I'm going to tell a bunch of stories. And as Thomas King, author of many books, including The Inconvenient Indian, also The Truth About Stories, and a recent novel of his I read called Indians on Vacation. He says, the truth about stories is that is all we are. The truth about stories, so the stories we tell about creation in particular here, that is who we are. We are in some very real sense the stories that we tell. Gerard Manley Hopkins has a different word for this. He calls it our inscape, the landscape in our minds. Those are the stories. They create this landscape in our minds through which we view the landscape out there. And Beth has spun 3 versions of the story last time. But the truth is that the stories we tell about creation are at the heart of our climate emergency, because they determine how we see things and how we act. So I'm going to tell a bunch of stories. That's the first thing. The second thing I'm going to do as we go through these stories is remind us that we all go through some kind of process where we have a story, we embody it, then something happens and we de-story, unstory ourselves. And then finally, we hopefully get to a place where we restory. We reconnect with perhaps our story or a new story that better helps us understand who we are and how we are to live. So I'm just going to, because all of us are in some version of that most of the time as we are alive. And the third thing I'm going to do is weave together a real example. So you see this process of storying, and then something happening, we get de-storied, and then restorying. Okay, and I'm going to give this personal example, which maybe give you a clue into how you and I can function with the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we live from, the stories that determine how we see ourselves in the world. So step 1, the creation story. So we're going to reread little parts of the primal creation story we read last time. The beginning day and the end, day 6 and 7, of what we call the first creation story in the Bible, Genesis 1 and the first bit of chapter 2. And here's my task for you. What one word or phrase would you use to describe this story? This is not lectio divina, what jumps out at you, but if you were to do a summary statement on an English exam that said, choose one word to describe this story or one phrase, just think about it in your head and then we'll pick it up. And Jeremy, fortunately, has agreed to tell us these stories. So Jeremy, you can unmute yourself, and I think Tuesday we'll put the text up on the screen, and then you can read this first story.
All right, Genesis 1, 1-5, and 1 verse 24 to chapter 2, verse 3. First this, God created the heavens and earth. All you see, all you don't see. Earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness, an inky blackness. God's spirit brooded like a bird above the watery abyss. God spoke, light, and light appeared. God saw that light was good and separated light from dark. God named the light day, and he named the dark night. It was evening, it was morning, day 1. Day 2, 3, 4, 5, and then God spoke, earth, generate life, every sort and kind, cattle and reptiles and wild animals, all kinds. And there it was, wild animals of every kind, cattle of all kinds, every sort of reptile and bug. God saw that it was good. God spoke, let us make human beings in our image, Make them reflecting our nature so they can be responsible for the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the cattle, and yes, earth itself, and every animal that moves on the face of the earth. God created human beings. He created them godlike, reflecting God's nature. He created them male and female. God blessed them. Prosper, reproduce, fill earth, take charge. Be responsible for fish in the sea and birds in the air, for every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. Then God said, I give you every sort of seed-bearing plant on earth, and every kind of fruit-bearing tree, given them to you for food. To all animals and all birds, to everything that moves and breathes, I give whatever grows out of the ground for food. And there it was. God looked over everything he had made. It was so, so very good. It was evening, it was morning, day 6. Heaven and earth were finished, down to the last detail. By the 7th day, God had finished his work. On the 7th day, he rested from all his work. God blessed the 7th day. He made it a holy day because on that day he rested from his work. All the creating God had done.
Word of the Lord, thanks be to God. Thanks, Jeremy. So, since we're not meeting in real life, but, what one word, one phrase, and I'm just going to throw out some that come to me. How about shalom? That sense of peace, not the absence of conflict, but presence of harmony. How about everything in right relation? There's also a fancy pants word I'm going to throw in called Co-Inherence, which is this idea of the play or interaction of separate things living from themselves for others, right? Living from each other for others. Anyway, those are some that I come up with, and just 3 Hebrew words that I'm going to mention. Beth mentioned some of them last time, but I think really important as we get this creation story. We're storing ourselves here. First, the word darkness. I'm just mentioning is hosek. And one of the things that keeps me in the Christian story is it doesn't ignore the reality of darkness. It's right there at the beginning. It deals with reality as we know it. It is not all light. There is real darkness. It is named, it's not eliminated, and boundaries are put on the darkness. So that's the first word, one for darkness. Second word is tov meod, very good. God's summary of the creation that the Creator has put together is that it's unbelievably, in Mark's paraphrase, and here you could insert your favorite swear word that you use for emphasis, unbelievably beeping good. That's that. We don't want to miss that. And the third word, which is typically translated dominion, Peterson uses responsible, is radah. The word dominion, not to be understood sort of as that old world of a dominion, a colonial dominion, like the Dominion of Canada, as Canada was once known. No, its root does have that sense of treading down, subjugating. It can mean rule, but it is a rule or a dominion that, what's the whole point of this? Seeks to keep everything in right relationship. The word steward, take care of things. So I think, don't forget, as we go to the story, we have agency. We have power to steward creation, to keep things in right relationship. Okay, so this is the story. We went through this. I just wanted to focus a little bit of intention on it, the sense of harmony, everything in right relationship. Now I'm giving you an example of the process: story, de-story, re-story. And this is just one from my former lives when I worked as a spiritual care coordinator, chaplain in a hospital. And I was invited in to meet with a lady whose husband was dying and had expressed suicidal ideation, and a social worker had said, you could talk to this guy, I think it might be helpful. Anyway, so what was the creation story of this relationship? A young Mexican woman had met this Canadian guy at the Mexico City Olympics in 1968, fell in love, moved from a cosmopolitan, warm, culturally rich place, and for 38 years had lived in I think in Terrace or Prince Rupert, and had a great life. And that was her creation story, right? Amazing. And actually, just mentioning Tuesday, can you throw up the next slide? The 1968 Olympics. Some of you were minus 20, minus 30 years old. The twinkling in the eye of your conception had not been happening even then. But here you are, the two American gold and bronze finalists in the 200 meters, Tommy Smith and John Carlos. This is 1968, you do the math, 50 odd years ago, chose that moment of glory to protest the racial inequality that was ripping that country apart. Interesting. Hey, I just thought that's an interesting thing to note. Anyway, that was the creation story for this lady, and we're going to pick it up. Okay, now we're going to the next step of this process. We get a story which we live from that sort of helps us move through the world, and then something happens to de-story or unstory us. We lose connection to it. And I'm just going to give the example. I'm just trying to do this personal example, step 2. What had de-storied this Mexican lady? Answer, her husband's cancer and imminent death. And her lovely creation story long ago in Mexico City in the Summer Olympics had disappeared. And having lost this story, she just wanted to end everything. Now, something like that will happen to most of us in our lives. Life happens, and we lose connection to the story that defines us, or that we think defines us. Now, in this case, that's what had happened to her. Now, in this case of the creation story we're talking about, where everything is unbelievably good and in right relationship, how can we de-story ourselves? Well, one way we can do it is not hold it in balance, or actually replace it with another creation story. And I'm going to do something cheeky here. And I'm going to say the way we can de-story our primal creation story is by replacing it, not holding it in tension, with the second creation story from our Bible. And so I'm going to get Jeremy again, he's doing the most of the work here, to read. We're going to pick it up in chapter 3. So these two creation stories. And of course, if I said to you, what about what Genesis and the creation story? Most people will say, oh yeah, that's Adam and Eve. There's an apple, there's a tree, there's a snake. This is that story. And again, just think, what one word, what phrase would you use to describe this creation story? So Jeremy, take it away. Chapter 3.
The serpent was clever, more clever than any wild animal God had made. He spoke to the woman. Do I understand that God told you not to eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, not at all. We can eat from the trees. We can eat from the trees in the garden. It's only the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, do not eat from it. Do not even touch it, or you'll die. The serpent told the woman, you won't die. God knows that the moment you eat from that tree, you'll see what's really going on. You'll be just like God, knowing everything, ranging all the way from good to evil. When the woman saw that the tree looked like good eating and realized what she would get out of it, she'd know everything. She took and ate the fruit and then gave some to her husband, and he ate it. Immediately, the two of them did see what's really going on, saw themselves naked. They sewed fig leaves together as makeshift clothes for themselves. When they heard the sound of God strolling in the garden in the evening breeze, the man and his wife hid in the trees of the garden, hid from God. God called to the man, where are you? He said, I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid. God said, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from that tree I told you not to eat from? The man said, The woman you gave me as a companion, she gave me fruit from the tree, and yes, I ate it. God said to the woman, what is this that you've done? The serpent seduced me, she said, and I ate. God told the serpent, because you've done this, you're cursed. Cursed beyond all cattle and wild animals, cursed to slink on your belly and eat dirt all your life. I'm declaring war between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He'll wound your head, you'll wound his heel. He told the woman, I'll multiply your pains in childbirth. You'll give birth to your babies in pain. You'll want to please your husband, but he'll lord it over you. He told the man, because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from, don't eat from this tree. The very ground is cursed because of you. Getting food from the ground will be as painful as having babies is for your wife. You'll be working in pain all your life long. The ground will sprout thorns and weeds. You'll get your food the hard way, planting and tilling and harvesting, sweating in the fields from dawn to dusk until you return to that ground yourself, dead and buried. You started out as dirt, you'll end up as dirt. The man, known as Adam, named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all the living. God made leather clothing for Adam and his wife and dressed them. God said, the man has become like one of us, capable of knowing everything, ranging from good to evil. What if he now should reach out and take fruit from the tree of life and eat and live forever? Never. This cannot happen. So God expelled them from the Garden of Eden and sent them to work the ground, the same dirt out of which they had been made. He threw them out of the garden and stationed angel cherubim and a revolving sword of fire east of it, guarding the path to the tree of life.
This too is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Anyway, one word or a phrase, right? And you could do a compare and contrast here. The feeling is instead of shalom, we could have the word alienation. There's a lot of that going on. Instead of everything in right relationship, it's almost nothing is in right relationship. The relationship between man and woman, humans in the land, humans in the Garden of Eden, humans and their childlike relationship to the Creator, shame, all broken. Instead of the fancy pants word co-inherence, I could make up another one, disinherence, right? Everything in their separate realities living from themselves instead of for others, for themselves. So I think it's interesting and disturbing, a little cheeky, you might say. See, if you start with story one and you accept your decentered role because we were made on the same day as the animals, and you have this mandate to exercise your power, your radah, your dominion, to keep everything in right relationship and see how things fit. That's sort of where you end up. If you just start with story two, you can easily become all kinds of things, but you can be passive because it all seems like it's all broken and everything's bad and it's all going downhill. And in the worst of my evangelical tradition, you end up prioritizing the restoration of one relationship between God and humans. That seems to be all that counts at the expense of all the other ones. I mean, there's a lot more going in here, but I just wanted to disrupt us from our own tradition, that if we don't hold these stories in some kind of tension and get the right story, we will not be successful co-creators, okay? So story, de-story, and then re-story. So this is why I'm doing this process, because we recognize that we're always, whether personally or individually, somewhere in this process of storing ourselves, something happening, we de-store it, and we need to re-story ourselves. So the example that I'm just giving to illustrate this process from this woman, her creation story, fall in love, Mexico City, 1968 Olympics, 38 years up in Prince Rupert. What had de-storied her? Her husband's cancer, imminent death, so that she wanted to end it all, really. No point living. draw my story to an end too, please. So I don't know how this worked, but here's, I might have told you this before, but it's well worth telling. In that hospital room, you can imagine her, in and out of consciousness, husband is there beside her. I meet her and I listened to her story and I said something like, wow, that is amazing story. You did something that not very many people would be able to do, right? Mexico City culture, rather all this stuff, to Prince Rupert for a Canadian of all people. No, I didn't say that, but I'm just riffing on it. I said, but you strike me you obviously someone very strong, very resourceful. And I know you don't feel like it now, but you sound like someone who will be able to get through this. Something like that. Since she came from a Catholic country, I assumed she wanted me to do something religious, like pray for her husband and her. And so I did, and never saw her again until about, I don't know, maybe a week, 2 weeks later. There was a teary voicemail on my work phone from her daughter, who said something like, I don't know what happened between your mom and you in my dad's hospital room, but she's a completely different person. I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you did. Now, I'm not sure what in fact I did, but the clue I have is I helped her re-story herself to her creation story, that she actually was a strong, resourceful person. She could carry on. Her life was not worth ending just yet, right? Restory. So how about for ourselves? We're talking about creation, being good co-creators in this climate emergency time. And now what I'm going to do is mash up two words that I mentioned before. That word for Radah, dominion. The good news, the terrifying news is we all have agency. We can all do something. And the word Sabbath, because if I asked you the question, what is the high point of creation? The wrong answer is the creation of human beings, because we're the center of everything. Actually, the right answer, I think, is the Sabbath. That's day 7. God creates the Sabbath. One Jewish rabbi calls it a palace in time. So we have dominion, we have agency, all of us, and there's the Sabbath thing. Now, for the Jews, they did Sabbath in 3 dimensions. Well, in 3 areas. First was the Sabbath that we all probably associate, Sunday or something like that. The weekly Sabbath where we stop what we're doing, and Creator knows that we're kind of forgetful people. We need weekly reminders about how our existence depends on the right relationship of everything. And we need a day each week or some part of a day to acknowledge sort of the sacredness of both the Creator and the creation. And that involves us having stopped doing something. Anyway, that's in our Belonging Handbook, one of our shared practices. The Hebrews also had a Sabbath practice for the land. I'll just read you something. Every 7 years, they let their field go kind of wild. Sow your fields, prune your vineyards, Leviticus 25. Take in your harvest for 6 years, but the 7th year the land will take a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath to God. You'll not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Don't reap what grows of itself. Don't harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land gets a year of complete and total rest, but you can eat from what the land volunteers during the Sabbath year. So how can we do this? We don't have a field, it doesn't seem practical to us. How can we do a Sabbath of the land that reminds us that we live in a very reciprocal relationship with creation? And I think I'm just going to suggest we get our hands dirty in creation. Get a plant, care for it. Maybe participate in some community gardens. Maybe figure out where the food you like to eat comes from. I remember many years ago really realizing these snow peas, they're so delicious, but they're flown from a halfway around the world for me. Is it really wise to be enabling that? Anyway, but you figure out what getting your hands dirty means so that you can have Radah, power, to do Sabbath, getting your hands dirty. And the final Sabbath practice they had was even more bizarre. Was this after 7 groups of 7 years, it says in Leviticus 25, proclaim freedom all over the land to everyone who lives in it. The Jubilee year, where, wait for it, this is what happened. All debts were canceled, all prisoners set free, all land given back to those who originally possessed it. And you might be saying with me, what? That would never work. How on earth on this beautiful earth can we do Jubilee? It's just a nice fairy tale. You know, can you imagine in the 47th year, someone coming up to you and saying, hey, Mark, could you lend me $100,000 for a down payment on this condo? And you would be thinking, wait, 47, 1 more year, all debts canceled. I'm not sure I can lend it to you right now. I mean, it just seems so impractical. But I'm going to suggest we can use our radah, our power, to do Sabbath in a Jubilee year by getting our hands dirty and getting involved in politics in its broadest sense, working with the disenfranchised, the dispossessed, working towards, justice and equity, all those kind of things. That throw out examples. Write a letter. You might say, that just goes in the recycling bin. Write a letter. If there's a public hearing that matters to you, have the guts with you or someone else, speak into that public hearing space. Volunteer with organizations that focus on the marginalized, that work towards inequality being minimized. I'm going to suggest something even really dirty is get involved in political parties that have some vision for doing Jubilee. They don't call it that, but working to get rid of this huge inequality we're living with. People getting pushed all to the margins. If you want to talk about getting dirty, volunteer in a municipal, provincial, or federal election campaign. Oh, it's messy. You won't agree with everything. You'll be working with people you wonder about. But you have power to get involved in doing a little bit of Jubilee work in the margins and getting your hands really messy. Good news and the terrifying news is each one of us has radah. We have power. The Creator has given it to us, and we can do Sabbath. We can get our hands dirty, and that's what it means to be a co-creator, getting our hands dirty, working in the Creator's direction. And may God give all of us wisdom and light a fire so that we become useful co-creators, right? Glory be to God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, Guide, Partner, as we traditionally name God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, ever shall be, world without end. Amen.